This video is about jury instructions and jury interrogatories, sometimes called special interrogatories or special jury interrogatories. Both jury instructions and jury interrogatories are closely related to the trial of a case. Some folks would say that jury instructions are perhaps the most important part of any case, and I can't really argue with that. If you think of the jury being responsible for listening to all the witnesses in the McCoy case and deciding who hit who first and who was defending themselves and who was instigating an assault, you have the question that is firmly the jury's. They listen to the people and they decide which person is telling the truth, which story they believe. With respect to that incident, though, the judge will be the one to instruct the jury in jury instructions about what the law of self-defense is. He'll tell the jurors that self-defense only applies to a situation where the individual trying to use the defense is not an aggressor. That is, you can't be an aggressor and then say, oh, I was in self-defense. He'll also tell the jury that self-defense has to be proportional, so that if someone slaps you and you hit them with a bat, probably not proportional. You've exceeded it. Once an attack stops, then you have a duty to stop. You can't continue on. And that's essentially what jury instructions are. They come from the judge. They are the last thing that jurors hear before they go in to decide their case. They're very important in a decision. Oftentimes, your best grounds of appeal are when a judge does not give the particular instruction that you believe is necessary, and you can hopefully take that up to a higher court and see how that court will deal with it. Once had a case where a judge refused to instruct on self-defense. I was defending someone, and honestly, I couldn't understand how the judge couldn't instruct the jury on self-defense. It took me about 20 years to decide maybe the judge was right. But had it not turned out okay, that would have been a big grounds for appeal, the failure to give the proper instructions. Jury interrogatories are different from discovery and certainly different from jury instructions. When the jury goes back to deliberate, they make a lot of interesting decisions about your case. And sometimes if you don't have interrogatories, all you may find is, we find for the defendant in the amount of $10,000. You really don't know exactly what was on the jury's mind. So oftentimes, and it can be critical, you'll ask the jury to decide the case and fill in certain important questions that they have answered. I have personal experience with some interesting jury interrogatories, once involving a case of some young men, two boys, 14, who got involved in a little vandalism. It would take a lawyer to call a little vandalism burning down a school, but that was actually what happened. And their claim was that it was not an intentional act. They had taken some pills, the nature of which they did not know what they were. They were in what an expert had said was some sort of a twilight state, not really conscious, and had proceeded to burn down this school. Our argument was, so if they were in this sort of walking sleep unconscious state, then their actions weren't, quote, intentional. What's the significance of that? Well, I'll tell you. The significance of that was if someone commits actions like that and it's not an intentional act, then homeowners insurance can be called upon to pay for some of the damages. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, that's why homeowners insurance can be expensive. Yes, but the interrogatories give you the jury's decision as to who they thought was most responsible, whether they thought it was intentional or unintentional. They will also sometimes be asked to give a percentage of liability, which can be important. They'll ask you if you thought that one defendant was responsible for, say, all of the 5 counts. They'd ask, did this person commit civil conspiracy? Did they commit assault? Did they commit intentional infliction of emotional distress? And would go down all those, and they'd say, of these, which one was most responsible? And they'd give a percentage. Some of those, because of insurance, with the right decision, may have an effect on the case. So That's what the interrogatories are for. Also, let me give you another real-life story that I have some knowledge of. A friend used to be involved in all death penalty cases where when trials were bifurcated, we've talked about bifurcated cases, or you've read about bifurcated cases in a civil action. In a civil action, the judge bifurcated the case. He said, let's do one part of the case as liability. Who was responsible for the harm to these people? Then, if they find that these people were responsible, then we go to the damages phase. In criminal law, in death penalty cases, the same thing applies. First, is the person guilty or not guilty of first-degree murder? If they are guilty of first-degree murder, then we go to the penalty phase. In the penalty phase, there are aggravating and mitigating circumstances. So this fellow was defending, so if someone's been convicted of first-degree murder and they're facing the penalty phase, defense wants to show that there are mitigating factors. So the special interrogatories that the jurors would answer would be, was this person subjected to cruel and unusual treatment at the hands of a parent through their younger years or through their adolescent years? Were they inflicted to psychological pain? It goes on to the point where they would develop over 100 questions, so they could cover almost anything. The particular case that I know he had worked on had to do with the person who was actually responsible for the adoption of Megan's Law. A terrible person, but I will say this, as terrible as they were, when you heard their lifetime story and the abusive, terrible situation in which they were raised, you recognize that some damaged people are damaged for a reason, and something that, to some extent may have been beyond their control. So in that case, they presented hours of testimony from people who were social workers for this person, who had observed his mistreatment over a long period of time. Other family members, a brother who was also seriously injured in a very difficult family. And that would be the use of the special jury interrogatories. So keep them straight, everybody. Jury instructions are the judge telling the jury what the law is. Jury interrogatories are the jurors, when they're deciding, giving you information about how they decided and what particular points they decided it upon. Thanks for listening, everybody.